Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled Exterior Tile Installation Systems, Warm Weather Tiling and Grouting, presented in conjunction with CTDA. I'm Jim Olson with the National Tile Contractors Association. I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today to attend today's webinar sponsored by MAPEI. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to remind you that during the webinar, you will be muted. Please use the questions area on your computer to type in your questions, and we'll answer those questions at the end of this presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, please call the number on the invite to this webinar and listen on your phone. All NTCA webinars are available to watch at any time on the NTCA YouTube channel shortly after the webinars are presented. This will give you easy access to watch and or share all current and past programs at your convenience. All right, I'm excited to introduce our first time speaker here on one of the NTCA's webinars, Holden Wheeler. He serves as a regional technical service representative for the South Central United States. As a local representative for MAPEI's U.S. Technical Services Department, Holden acts as a technical liaison between distributors, end users, product management, R&D, research and development, and sales representatives. In addition to being a third-generation flooring installer, Holden draws from years of experience in the building materials distribution, installation management, and first-hand MAPEI product knowledge with a specialty in tile and stone products, as well as MAPEI's UltraCare line of care and maintenance products. Welcome, Holden. Look forward to a great presentation.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to do my first one of these with y'all. So hello, everybody. Again, my name is Holden. I'm with MAPEI. I'm in the Technical Services Department, and I just want to give a little warning to headphone users. I am at our plant setting up for a gauge porcelain training here, so there's some forklifts on the other side of the wall, and you may hear some beeps here and there if you're using headphones. I think we'll be all right, but just wanted to get that out of the way. So let's go ahead and get started. For everybody's favorite topic here is going to be the heat of summer. Since we're getting real close to that summer solstice in the next couple weeks, it's already cooking. I live in DFW, and today our heat index is almost 100. So it's top of mind for me, especially at our manufacturing plant here in Dallas, because it is not climate controlled out there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here are our learning objectives. What we're going to learn about today is, one, how to not be this popsicle over here on the right. And then we're going to go into the exterior installation challenges, the importance of following a given product's mixing ratio. So we'll talk a little bit about powder and water and how much you want to add with each product and when you should look at the technical data sheet and instructions. Oh, did I just do something, Jim? There we go. Okay, so then we'll go into acceptable installation temperatures, open time, hot life, and retempering. We'll talk a little bit about what each of those three are. Product storage, the importance of keeping things out of direct sunlight and storing them in HVAC controlled areas when you can. The importance and explanation of SSD, which is saturated surface dry. The challenges of using rapid setting products in the heat. And then at the very end, we'll go over some tips and tricks to help make your installations outside in the heat more successful. So the first thing we'll talk about here is just some of the issues that we run into whenever we're doing these installations outside. A lot of the things are similar with just unclimate controlled spaces, areas where maybe like tract homes where you don't have the HVAC system in yet, but they want the installation done anyway. But this is more going to be focused towards outside. So the first and foremost thing is the big ball of fire in the sky, the direct sunlight. Trying to avoid it anywhere you can is going to be paramount. Putting up the pop-up canopies, building temporary or semi-permanent shade structures, just something to keep the sun from beating down on your tile or your mortar, installing it. Wind is a big one. You can't really control it, but you can sometimes put up like a small barrier around where you're working to help keep the wind from blowing directly on your workspace. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Temperature is a big one. We can't change the temperature outside, but we can help control the temperature of the items that we're installing. So keeping bags in garages versus the middle of the driveway is going to change the way that product acts. Available water sources. The same rule applies as anything else. If you can't drink it, you shouldn't be mixing your products with it. And that not just for quality, but temperature too. If it's too hot to drink, it's going to be too hot to mix with anything. Time constraints. How long do you have to finish this job? Is it going to be flexible if you can't work one day because it's just simply too hot? Are you going to have to work in certain hours of the day when it's cooler? Material storage, where you're keeping the tile, the grout, the mortar, the membranes, it all makes a big difference. Like I said before, you don't want to just drop the pallets on the driveway and pick your mortar off one by one from there when they're 120 degrees. Substrate porosity. This is a big one, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to combat the porosity of a thirsty substrate a little bit further on. So the very most important thing that any of us here at MAPEI, or probably any of our other competitors are going to tell you, is the water mixing ratio is the most important thing when it comes to our products and what they can do and making sure they do what we say they can. So ours and everybody else's are going to give you a range for most products, starting low and ending high, for how much water that you mix in with the products. It's going to be on the product literature. It's going to be on the back of the bag. It's going to be at the end of a 1-800 number if you simply can't find it anywhere. And that water range was designed by chemists, much smarter than I am, that know exactly what chemical reactions need to happen, when they need to happen, and how much water it's going to take to make them happen. So just winging it or mixing by feel is probably not going to get you where you need to be water ratio wise. So always follow those instructions on the bag. Sometimes you may need to mix towards that higher end of the ratio when you're working outside or in really high temperatures. And that may simply be because if you mix on the lower end, it's just too hot and the stuff's drying out too quick. So wetter may be better in that scenario. You never want to add more than what the bag says or less, because it's just not going to do what the product was designed to do. And this bottom point is probably the most important one. Lean on your reps if something's not working right. If you're following all the instructions and you still just can't get a product to work the way you need it to, call somebody. Call the 1-800 number on the back. If you know your local rep, get a hold of them and they will help you, because if anybody knows, it's going to be one of the people that represent the product you're using. So I know the temperature is a little hard to see on the right there, but it says 120.6 degrees. This was my backyard around noon, and I just turned the hose right on into that bucket and hit it with the temperature gun. So it's only 85 degrees out in this shot, but the water that was in the hose was almost 121 degrees. And this was last month, so May. So imagine I'd probably add another 10, 20 degrees on there in the next coming months. So is that going to be the water that we want to mix our product with? Definitely not. It took me about 5 minutes of just standing there and waiting and waiting and waiting with that hose running before I got water out that was a decent temperature. The coolest it got was about 80 degrees, which is a heck of a lot better than 120.6. So things to be aware of. Hot hose water that's just been sitting in the sun percolating all day, because most hoses aren't a light color. Let it run cool before you start measuring out your mixing water. And once we get into the tips and tricks section, we'll talk a little bit more about some things you can do to cool down your mixing water and things of that nature. So the next thing we're going to roll into is the acceptable installation temperature ranges. Every product out there, whether it's ours or anybody else's, is going to give you a range temperature-wise that you can install it. And if you look right here where the arrow is pointing, this is a screenshot from the instructions on one of our grouts. And you can see the little thermometer icon on our man fixtures here, and it says our temperature range is 50 to 95 degrees. So you don't want to install this any cooler than 50 or any warmer than 95 degrees, because anything outside of those limits, we can't guarantee the product's going to work the way we designed it to. And as you approach that 95, it's going to be very tough to work with. Most cement and epoxy products do become very difficult to control as you get upwards of 90 degrees. Doesn't mean you can't make it happen, but it can be difficult. And that 95 degrees is not just the air temperature around you. That's going to be the temperature of the powder itself, the water you're mixing it with, the tile that's going to be going on to, and the substrate temperature. So you've got to make sure all these temperatures are in check. So if there's no shade and the sun's been beating on this concrete slab and they want you to install tile right now, it's not a good idea. So every product's going to have a sweet spot for performance, and this is important, and it's going to be different for every product. But it is important to know that most products are going to be tested at ideal conditions, which are about 73 degrees, 50% relative humidity. Now, in the summer in North Texas, it's not going to be that. I think we might get maybe a week of that temperature a year. So ideal conditions aren't going to be very common, and you have to adjust, which is going to be controlling the temperature of the product, controlling the temperature of the mixing water, controlling the temperature of the job site as best you can, or sometimes the best answer may be to not do the job at that particular time. I know there's a lot of jobs in Canada that don't get done in the winter just because it's too cold. So there are some jobs in the summer that may not be a good idea to continue doing. And very last spot here, see, I skipped over limitations. Always check your limitations on product literature. Everybody's going to have them, and it's going to tell you what you can and cannot do with a product. And a lot of times there's going to be temperature limitations written in there as well. So here are three very important definitions for what we're talking about in regards to product usability in hot temperatures. Open time is the amount of time you have after spreading mortar before you lose your tackiness, or when you go to touch the mortar ridges and it doesn't transfer to your finger anymore. So the mortar that you spread out after the open time has passed is no longer sticky. So if it's not sticky, you cannot bond a tile to it anymore. I'm sure plenty of y'all have seen pictures of tile just popping up clean, and you can see closed mortar ridges underneath it, but nothing bonded to the back of the tile. It's very likely they exceeded their open time, and then that's called skinning over, where the mortar stops being tacky. And the open time is usually going to be reduced when we're installing outside, especially in the summertime, just due to heat and humidity and substrate porosity, you name it. There's just a lot going against you outside that's going to rob that mortar of its open time. So looking at the product data, seeing what your open time is very important, and also keeping in mind that that open time is measured in a lab, not the job site that you're standing at on that day. So you may have a little bit less than what we say or what anybody says on the actual product literature. The next thing is pot life. Pot life is how long you have after you've mixed the material. So once you add the water, you hit it with the mixing drill, that's when your pot life timer starts. So usually we're talking hours. Rapid sets, not so much, but you may not have hours if it's 110 degrees outside and you're in direct sunlight using the material, or if the mixing water came straight out of the hose before it was ran clean. You're probably going to have half your pot life. And retempering is the ability to remix without adding water. So this is what this is going to do is, once you've used, let's say, half your bucket of mortar, it starts to firm up on you. You can't spread it as easily anymore. You put the mixing drill back in the bucket and you re-whip it again without adding water, and that can most of the times, bring the mortar back to a usable consistency. Now, sometimes if you go a little too long, it may not be possible, but sometimes you might be able to do it 2 times. But you never want to add water, because what that's going to do is give you a much lower strength material once it's all said and done and dried and cured. Because what happens is that extra water gets in between all the little cement molecules that have already started to grow together and it pushes them apart. So you end up with a weaker mix at the end of everything. And it may feel great going down, it might be nice and smooth again, but it will be weak. So if you ever have to remix material, just keep that water out of it. Just hit it with the mixing drill. If it doesn't come back, just toss it, make a new batch. It's not worth it to try and save it. And product storage, this is a big one. This is a project that I was at a couple years ago here in the picture, and there were something along the lines of 8 pallets of material that were just out in the parking lot. And we hit the bags. I wish I would have got a picture, but we didn't. We hit the bags with a thermal gun, and they were 135 degrees, and it was still morning. So we had them bring everything inside and just store it all inside until they could actually mix the material. It's amazing how hot some of these bags get. And when you've got a pallet of 56 bags and it's all powder, the very center of that pallet can really hold the temperature for a long time. So even after this stuff came inside, they had to wait until the next day before even using it because it was still very, very warm. So when at all possible, store your material inside. If you can't store it inside, at least cover it with something. Try and get it in the shade as best as possible. The pop-up canopy that they have here, obviously they're not using it for shade because they're inside. They're using that to keep the dust from staining the ceiling tiles. But those little canopies are great. A couple of them, keep them around, and you can put them over your mixing station, put them over your working area, put them over where your pallets are being stored, and it'll really keep the sun off of things. And what I like to tell everybody is just go to Home Depot and get a cheap thermal gun, one of those infrared thermometers. Since we've had COVID, they're all over the place. You can get them for next to nothing nowadays. And just see what the temperatures are for everything. You can hit the substrate, hit your tile, hit the mortar, and just see what the surface temperatures are of everything and get a good idea of what you're working with. And speaking of the thermal gun, here it is again. So this is the difference between storing product inside and product sitting outside. So these photos were taken 45 minutes apart, 10 o'clock in the morning, same 3 bags. One was stored inside on a warehouse floor, so it wasn't climatized, but it was inside in shade, and the ambient temperature outside was 80 degrees. So the bags were about 80 degrees. They sat out on the tailgate of the truck in half sun, mind you, for about 45 minutes, and they were already 120 degrees. It's crazy the amount of temperature gain these products can get just from sitting in direct sunlight, even if it's not hot out. Because, I mean, it's arguable that 80 degrees isn't real hot to a Texan. So it's, considering it's 80 degrees out, that bag's 120, and it's only been sitting there for a little while. If it sat out there all day, it would be even warmer. And this is not something that we want to mix and try and use because it's not going to perform the way we want it to. The chemical reactions are not going to happen properly, and it's going to be very hard for the installer to work with because it's going to want to set up just so fast from all the heat. So now let's talk a little bit about making life easier when we're installing outside. So this photo on the right here shows what's called SSD, which if you've been around in the industry long enough, you've heard this tossed around plenty. It's saturated surface dry. So what you're doing is you're saturating the pores of your substrate with water, just the pores. You're not trying to make a waterfall on a wall or leave puddles all over a floor. You just want to give the substrate a little drink of water to fill up those surface pores with a little bit of moisture. And to do that, you can use a pump-up sprayer, like a garden sprayer, a backpack sprayer, a sponge, the well-wrung out sponge or towel, and just give it a wipe or a spritz. You're not going to take the garden hose and spray down the wall because that's just going to add way too much water. It's just a little bit. You can see here, my buddy Jeff here has the pump sprayer, and he's spraying the wall as Mike comes behind him and puts up the rendering mortar. So he's hitting that wall while it's still moist and getting the cement material up there. And we'll talk about why right now. What SSD does is it keeps the substrate from robbing moisture from your cement material. So whether you're doing a patch, a skim coat, a rendering mortar, or just installing the tile straight to the substrate, this little bit of water helps keep the moisture in the cement material. So these chemists design these products to do a certain thing with a certain amount of water. And of course, we read the bag, so we put the right amount of water in it. But the second you trowel it onto a dry concrete slab that's really thirsty in the middle of summer, it's going to pull all that water out of it that we just measured, making the material not do exactly what we designed it to. So giving it that first drink of water really helps the product be as successful as it can. And it also has a slight cooling effect. I'm not saying it's going to make anything cold. You might lose a degree or two just from the moisture, which, hey, every little bit counts when we're outside in the middle of summer. It also helps with just your ease of troweling. Having that little bubble of water in the pores of the cement or whatever the substrate is you're going over helps the mortar just sort of glide over the surface. It's a little bit easier on you. It's not a dramatic difference, but hey, every little bit counts. And it does sort of act like a pseudo grout release. If you pre-wet the tile before you grout, especially with pre-mixed grouts, what they'll stick to that little glaze of water versus the surface of the tile, so cleanup is a whole lot easier. And what this also is going to do is just clean up that last little bit of dust and dirt that may still be on the surface of the tile, or well, on the substrate or the tile, depending if you're grouting. And it's outside, the wind's probably blowing, and I'm sure you've cleaned the substrate 6 times, but one more wipe before you install is never going to hurt. And speaking of cleaning, we want to make sure our buckets are as clean as possible. Everybody's seen the bucket to the right, and hopefully the only reason you have it on your truck right now is to spin off your mixing paddle or to wash your margin trowels in it, because you should not be mixing any new products in that. With old buckets like this that have old cured material on them, whenever you try and mix something new in there, it can actually accelerate the curing time of any new material, which we don't want when we're outside. We're already working against the clock. So you want to keep your buckets clean. If they look like this and the material's still wet in it, scrape it out, rinse it out, do whatever you can. If it looks like this and it's all dried and hard, throw the bucket away. It's not worth losing a whole bag of mortar over a $5 bucket. So that is a big one that often gets forgotten. Just don't do it. And there are some instances where you might want to use a rapid set outside. I'm not a fast enough installer to do this. I can barely use a rapid set inside. So hats off to the guys that can handle it out exterior. But there are some things to keep in mind with rapid sets versus regular setting cements outside. So first of all, rapid sets, they cure thermally. So what that means is they heat up to actually cook off the extra water in them that they don't need for curing. And what that'll do is that they'll actually heat up, and literally it'll just cook off the water. With our demonstrations that we do, we have a patch that we like to ramp with, and we'll do say a 2-inch thick ramp, and in about 10 minutes you can put your hand on it and it feels dry and it's hot. And that's just the way these things work. So if the material creates heat to cure and you're outside in the heat, it's going to cure a lot faster. So heat will expedite that thermal reaction, which means it's going to expedite curing. So you'll have a lot less time to work with it than you expected. Hot life and open times are going to be greatly reduced. Again, heat, thermal reaction, etc. And setting too fast can cause strength issues in cement products. And this is not just rapid setting materials, it's everything. If it cures too quickly, say faster than the product was designed to cure, you can have strength issues where the cement didn't do everything it was supposed to do before it ran out of water. And porosity in substrates may be pulling too much moisture from the product. Again, not just rapid setting products exclusive, that's with anything. So if you've got a super thirsty substrate, you SSD'd it 8 times and it's just not looking wet at all, it may be something you want to prime and try and get some of those pores closed up with something. That way it's not robbing it from your mortar. And here are some tips and tricks to just help be successful as we get into this higher temperature season. So some of this is a little redundant. I've already talked about it, but it's really good to just go over it again. Cover areas in direct sun as much as possible. And like I mentioned before, that's not just where you're installing. It's everything you're touching that day. Your tile, your grout, your mortar, your mixing water. Keep everything in the shade, in an HVAC control area, just somewhere that's not getting beat down on by the sun. Let hose water run cool before measuring out your water. Very important. We saw the temperature earlier at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was 40-degree difference just between the hose water and the ambient temperature outside. Keep everything out of the sun. Ice down buckets for mixing water. So what you can do here is a double bucket method, where you have a 5-gallon bucket just filled with ice, and you drop another 5-gallon bucket on top of it full of water, and that'll chill out your mixing water so you can measure out of it. I've also heard of some installers taking the big contractor-sized trash cans, and I'm not sure where they find it, but they'll find like a giant block of ice, put it in the bottom of there, and then fill that up with their mixing water as well. What is happening? There we go. And then all the material coming out of the trash can will be cold, but you won't have chunks of ice coming with it. So icing down the water is a really good trick, because mixing water is one of the harder ones to control temperature of, because you're usually at the mercy of however warm or cool it is coming out of a hose spigot. Always SSD your surfaces. It's a good idea to do the substrate, the back of the tile. Before you grout, do the top of the tile. Just get that first drink of water in there and help give the cement products a fighting chance. You can prime overly porous substrates and help get rid of some of the surface porosity, which will help give you as much of the open working time as possible. Spread only as much material that can be installed into before skinning over. It's in the product literature. It should be on the back of the bag, is how long you have to work with a product. So know that number, and know that it's probably going to be a smaller number outside in summer, and try and pace yourself. You may have to do a mock-up area just to see how quick things are going to set up on you before you commit to doing the whole area, and just knowing your own speed is going to help with that. And last and most importantly, read the product data. It's really important to know as much as you can about anything that you're installing and what it can and cannot do. Product literature has come a long way in the recent years, and there's just a ton of information out there at your fingertips. You can know every little thing about what a mortar is going to do, whether it's say a $6 bag, a $30 bag. You'll know every single thing. And that is all I have.
Holden, great job. A lot of great information, very well presented. Thank you. I do want you to know we have some questions and some comments here. I'll read them to you, and if you would like to comment or answer, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
So this is a comment from one of the NTCA trainers, and it just mentions the fact that while installers and contractors attend any of the NTCA regional training programs, they get to spend an entire day with people like you and have the opportunity to get some one-on-one answers to their questions and live and tile installation concerns similar to what you're answering right now and what you're talking about. I appreciate him reaching out and saying that. A little ad for NTCA workshops and training events, so that's great.
That is a good plug. And I mean, between us product reps and your team, you know, that there's probably no question that can't be answered either on the spot or within a couple phone calls. There's a lot of knowledge in the room at these workshops and regionals.
There really are. Thank you. All right, here we go. Are there any exposure limitations to your liquid waterproof membranes once installed in exteriorly?
Yes, there are, and they're going to be different for each product. So let's just say the most popular one, which is Aqua Defense, we don't want you to leave it uncovered for any more than 3 days. And every other product's going to be different. So if you're using ours or somebody else's, just either check with your reps or check the data sheet.
For that same product, what is the wet mill thickness that's required for this in exposure?
For exposure, or just in general?
Uh, I think she was talking about exterior, uh, when it's hot out like that. Is
Okay.
do you go thicker or do you go thinner?
No, so for
Or
something like Aqua Defense, it's not going to change just because we're outside. Um, since it's pre-mixed and ready to go, as long as you're hitting the required mill thickness, it shouldn't change the way you apply it. It's I'm just trying to think of a circumstance where it would be different, and it's not. We want 2 coats, credit card thickness once it's dry, and it'll be the same inside, outside, steam room, swimming pool.
Holden, each you're saying two applications, each one credit card thickness or a combined once they're both done?
Combined once they're dry. Sorry.
Great, excellent, fantastic. All right, so next one, real quickly, I wanna mention something that Holden mentioned right at the very beginning, and that is manufacturer's recommendations supersede anything else you'll find. So you might see something in a TCNA handbook or the NTCA reference manual, but you really always want to check with your manufacturer's recommendations. So read those bags, read the instructions, call your technical person from that company. You can get that number on the back of a bag or back of a bucket or anything. So really make sure if you have questions, you can definitely contact technical services. Very important.
Absolutely.
All right. Someone is saying here, I used to live in Florida where you can fry an egg on the sidewalk. Will SSD work in a situation where the water almost instantly evaporates and you see steam coming up?
No. So I think one of the S's in SSD would be steam at that point. So it's definitely not going to be conducive to good tile installation if it's that hot out. That may be one of those scenarios where the job gets pushed until it's a little more favorable conditions outside.
Or for
And
sure tented, right? For sure tented.
absolutely. I mean, if it's that hot, the tent will help. I don't know. It might still be too hot under the tent, or the tent might
Right,
catch on fire.
right. All right, here's the next one. If it's a very warm day and I need to throw away half of my batch of mortar or grout, do you recommend mixing only a portion of the whole unit so that the material is not wasted? If so, do you have any particular methods to ensure that the water mortar ratios are accurate? Measure by weight or volume? Wow, good
So
question.
that is a great question, and it's a hot topic. No pun intended, or maybe it was. Um, we we're pretty firm on not liking partial batches. We make some concessions when it comes to grout, just because there are some instances where you need a partial bag of grout. But for mortar, it's really hard with all the raw ingredients that are in them to portion it out and get a little bit of every little raw ingredient. You know, it's like taking your dry cake batter and trying to make one individual cupcake out of a whole Betty Crocker cake mix. You might just only get flour instead of the flour, the baking soda, and everything else that's in there. So it's really best to just mix full bags. Some products come in smaller bags. There are some out there that are 25 pounders instead of 50. So you're starting with a half bag right there. And that may be something to look into. Or just if you control the temperature you're mixing water in the bags themselves, you shouldn't be having pot life issues, but it just all depends on the scenario.
And it's really a good question and something that's hard to do, but you do need to take that into effect if you're bidding a job, right? If it's going to be exterior, outdoors, hot, maybe you have to raise your prices just a little bit to take care of loss of product if you think that's going to happen. But
right, and just because we don't really like doing partial batches doesn't mean you can't. It doesn't mean you can't do it right and well and be successful with it. Dry blending all the powder together is a really big thing to help make sure all the raw ingredients are as homogenized as possible. But it's one of those things. Reach out to your local rep and see for your particular product, project, and manufacturer if they have a different opinion or some guidance for you. As a general rule, we just say, please mix a full bag when possible.
Great. I do want to mention the fact that many of our attendees today have said great job on the questions area and that you're doing a great job. So I just wanted to relay that to you. And one gentleman, it makes a lot more sense than crossing your fingers and hoping for the best, right? So good to know.
That's a rough business model.
All right. We got one more here, unless any come in here soon. What products are recommended for exterior mortar? Carabond with Caralastic. Others, can you use Ultraflex LFT, Ultraflex 2 products outside? This person's a retailer and they're trying to recommend the proper products and advice to their customers.
Okay, so that might be a little more of an individualized answer because the right product to use outside is going to vary between, say, where I'm at in Dallas and where you're at, Jim. You've got some places in the world that have real harsh winters and real wild temperature swings. You've got some that are more temperate, more reasonable, and just kind of even keel. So there's no right or wrong answer outside everywhere. Carabond Caralastic is pretty close to the right answer everywhere, but there are a lot of other things you can use, and it really just depends, where you're at in your climate. So I would suggest either reach out to me after and tell me where you're at and we can talk about it, or we can try and get you hooked up with your local rep to actually chat about like an exterior lineup offering.
So what Holden's saying is, I'm in Minnesota, he's in Texas. So yes, we have harsher winters and it's different. But again, I'm going to go back to call MAPEI's technical line, tell them where you live, what's going on, what your project is. They will make a great recommendation to you for sure. So that'll be great. All right, here's another question, just came in. Would tile color or type play into any of this?
Absolutely. So type, maybe not as much. I don't know the thermal properties between, versus a porcelain and ceramic, but I do know that a black tile is going to absorb a lot more heat than a white tile. So if your pallet of black tile is sitting out in the backyard waiting to go on that patio slab, in direct sunlight, it's going to be a whole lot hotter than a pallet of white tile sitting right next to it. So it will make a difference, especially once it's installed too, and if it's left uncovered.
And a quarry tile will absorb more and faster also, as opposed to like a porcelain tile, correct?
I would imagine.
Yes, very much.
We talking moisture or temperature?
So I think color more than anything, but that moisture when you're wetting it down, I think it can make a difference. A quarry tile would definitely need a little bit more moisture put in it than a porcelain tile before you.
Oh yes, and that's the SSD thing coming back around. You can SSD a porcelain, a ceramic, and a quarry, but it's probably going to make your most difference on the ceramic and quarry tile because they are a more porous tile.
So here's a comment that came in, and it has to do along the lines of the question asked about being hot in Florida and it's water just steams when it hits a sidewalk or whatever.
Okay.
This person mentions that there's breathable shade fabrics available to help keep sun off of workers and substrates. He's saying, however, if it's attached to a scaffolding, the company erects the scaffold. The company erecting the scaffold must be consulted prior to attaching it to the scaffold to ensure that the scaffold will handle the increased wind load stresses. That's a great, some great advice right there. So that is all that I have, Holden. I want to thank everyone. We've had a great attendance today, and we're really grateful that you all attended. I want to make sure that our next program is on June 15th, and you will get invites soon. Holden, I want to thank you. You did a great job. I hope you do some more webinars with us, and very much looking forward to all of it. I want to thank you for attending. Hope you have a great week and weekend coming up, and enjoy the summer while you can. Thanks, Holden.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.